Hi there, my name's Justyn. Thank you for joining us as we continue our Lost series, looking at the parables in Luke's Gospel. What is the best advice your grandma gave you? What's the best advice your grandma gave you? I'm sure there's a few little gems of advice that are whizzing around your head, but I wonder if your grandma gave you this, well, what I think is a pretty common bit of advice. Always leave the house with clean underwear on. Because if you get hit by a bus, you don't want to be embarrassed in front of the paramedics. Was that some advice that you have heard before or you have been given? Make sure you're always wearing your clean knickers. Now, I don't know how many people intentionally go out of the house with dirty knickers on, but I also don't know how many paramedics are interested in the state of your underwear. They tend to check your temp, your blood pressure, your heart rate, your saturation levels. But hey, today's message is called Nice Knickers. If you're taking notes, today's message is called Nice Knickers. The most expensive knickers that I could find, thanks to the wonder of the internet. There's a beautiful pair of black boxer shorts for men made by Nice Laundry, 100% cashmere. Oh, that's nice, with that little gold embroidery on, for only $1,400 US. Woof. That is quite pricey. I would hope if I was wearing those I didn't get hit by a bus, because they would cost a lot to replace. For the ladies watching, the most expensive pair of knickers I've been able to find for you were sold in 2011 for £9,375, size 30-inch waist, previously worn by Queen Victoria. And those are a big pair of undergarments. So, there we go. If you're looking for some new underwear, hopefully that's given you a few ideas. And I hope you're wearing clean underwear today, because the parable that we're going to look at is quite exposing. In fact, there are quite a few what I would call squeaky bum moments in it. Let's get to the text. The parable of the rich man and Lazarus in Luke chapter 16. Jesus said, "There was a certain man who was splendidly clothed in purple and fine linen, who lived each day in luxury. At his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, who was covered with sores. As Lazarus lay there longing for scraps from the rich man's table, the dogs would come and lick his open sores. Finally, the poor man died and was carried by the angels to sit beside Abraham at the heavenly banquet. The rich man also died and was buried, and he went to the place of the dead. There, in torment, he saw Abraham in the far distance with Lazarus at his side. The rich man shouted, 'Father Abraham, have some pity. Send Lazarus over to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue. I am in anguish in these flames.' But Abraham said to him, 'Son, remember that during your lifetime you had everything you wanted, and Lazarus had nothing. So now here he is being comforted, and you are in anguish. And besides, there is a great chasm separating us, and no one can cross over to you from here, and no one can cross over to us from there.' Then the rich man said, 'Please, Father Abraham, at least send him to my father's home. For I have 5 brothers, and I want him to warn them so they don't end up in this place of torment.' But Abraham said, 'Moses and the prophets have warned them. Your brothers can read what they wrote.' The rich man replied, 'No, Father Abraham, but if someone is sent to them from the dead, then they will repent of their sins and turn to God.' But Abraham said, 'If they won't listen to Moses and the prophets, they won't be persuaded, even if someone rises from the dead.'" It's a challenging and a confronting parable, isn't it? And it's worth knowing that for Jesus and for his hearers, maybe this kind of parable isn't an original idea. There are lots of contemporary stories circulating at the time, both in Jewish culture and in Greek culture, of this idea of there being a reversal, of people going to the afterlife and seeing that those who've had it all in this world have got nothing in the next life, and those who have suffered in this world have got everything in the next life. But this parable's not massively easy to handle. But I think one of the first things to notice is that this is a parable of contrasts. There are so many contrasts in this. The rich man is excessively rich. He is dressed in splendid purple. Purple in ancient times was one of the most expensive colours and dyes to wear. And so to not just be dressed in purple, but splendidly dressed in purple, shows a level of extreme wealth. He is buying the Louis Vuitton of his day and beyond. Not only that, but he's wearing pure fine linen. Linen is probably his undergarments. He's not just got one nice coat that he brings out. He's got lots of nice coats and lots of nice knickers. This guy is richy rich. In contrast, Lazarus is dressed in sores. He's dressed in poverty. The rich man is stuffing his face in luxury. Lazarus is racked with hunger. Lazarus longs for some compassion and pity from the rich man's table, but all he gets is the dogs licking his wounds. When you're being outdone in your compassion by a dog, you're in a pretty bad spot, aren't you? If your dog is more generous than you are, that's not a great thing to be compared to. And both the rich man and Lazarus die, and then again we have these contrasts. Lazarus is now not lying at a gate, he's reclining at a banquet. And the rich man, rather than having an abundance of luxury, is now in torment and suffering. The rich man showed no pity to Lazarus in life, yet in death he expects pity to be shown to him. The rich man in life wouldn't do anything to serve Lazarus, yet in death expects Lazarus to serve him. Father Abraham, send him to bring me some water, send him to my father's house. Well, hang on a minute, you wouldn't get out of your table for Lazarus in your lifetime, but now you expect to be able to boss him around in the afterlife. The rich man had all the comforts and luxury of this life and all the torments and anguish of the life to come. Lazarus had all the torments and anguish of this life and all of the comfort and luxury of the life to come. Another contrast that I think is pretty stark for us to notice is that the rich man could have got up and gone out of his gate to Lazarus. He could have crossed that distance had he so chosen. But in the afterlife, the distance between the rich man and Lazarus is fixed. Abraham says there's this great chasm between us. You wouldn't just step outside your front door for Lazarus, but now in eternity, even if he wanted to, Lazarus cannot cross and come to you. It's like Father Abraham is saying, in your life, you had an opportunity to change, but now in death, these things are fixed. So what do we make of this? Right? I mean, this is a pretty tricky passage. Is Jesus saying that, everyone who's rich will automatically kind of be tormented in the afterlife, and everyone who's got nothing in this world is automatically going to heaven? What are we to make of what Jesus is saying here? Well, as we've said many times before, but again, it's worth repeating. I think especially in Luke, it's worth looking at the context in which Jesus is talking. And Luke 14, Luke 15 and Luke 16, I think Jesus is building to a crescendo. I think Jesus is ramping up the pressure under the religious of his day, under those of his day who would have thought they were close to God. And Jesus keeps pressing in on them. In Luke 14, he calls them out for grabbing the places of honor for themselves whilst neglecting a sick man who is suffering. And he calls them out for it. And he says, you're racing to the top, but God's going to put you at the bottom. In Luke 15, they're moaning that Jesus is eating with sinners. And so Jesus tells them 3 stories to say, heaven is going to be a party thrown for sinners. Heaven is this eternal party where those who know they are sinners, have repented, come to Christ, and they're going to celebrate with him for eternity. And if you don't watch it, you're going to miss out, because your self-righteousness will keep you outside of the party. And then Luke 16, he is challenging their love of money. He is hitting hard at those who have. And he is saying the way you are using what you have is showing that actually maybe you're the ones that are lost. So we need to think about, what is the primary purpose of this story for Jesus? Klein Snodgrass is a New Testament scholar, and he writes a book on the parables called Stories with Intent. That's a great way to think about the parables. They're a story, but underneath the story there is an intention. Jesus isn't just telling a story for fun. He's not like me, just, Googling things on the internet to try and pad out the first 5 minutes of his message and coming up with pictures of boxer shorts. Jesus is deliberately telling this story because there's an intention that he is driving home. And I think Jesus' intention here is to warn those who are religious but have a lot, that the way they're living their life is actually showing they've misunderstood the kingdom of God. Let's look just what happens just before Jesus tells the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. Well, he tells another parable about a shrewd manager. And time doesn't allow us to go into that, but Jesus very helpfully at the end of this parable tells us what his intent is. He says, here's the lesson. Use your worldly resources to benefit others and make friends. Then when your possessions are gone, they will welcome you to an eternal home. If you are faithful in little things, you will be faithful in large ones. But if you are dishonest in little things, you won't be honest with greater responsibilities. And if you are untrustworthy about worldly wealth, who will trust you with the riches of heaven? And if you are not faithful with other people's things, why should you be trusted with things of your own? No one can serve 2 masters, for you will hate one and love the other. You will be devoted to one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and be enslaved to money. Then the Pharisees, who dearly loved their money, heard all this and scoffed at him. Then he said to them, you like to appear righteous in public, but God knows your hearts. What this world honors is detestable in God's sight. Again, I think in Luke 16, we've got what we've got in Luke 14, Luke 15, and Luke 16, where Jesus is challenging the religious of his day and say, you're not chasing after the right things. You're chasing after honor for yourself. You're chasing after keeping yourself separate from those who you think are less than you, those who you think are unclean and unholy. And then in this chapter, he's saying you're chasing after worldly wealth when you should be thinking about heavenly wealth. And he hits the bullseye on the head, the bullseye on the mark, whatever it is you do with a bullseye, when he says, if you cannot be trusted with your worldly possessions, why would you be entrusted with the heavenly ones? I think often we use this parable to think about the afterlife, to think about the nature of heaven and hell, to think about the nature of judgment, to think about the kind of fixed state that we enter into when we die, depending on the decisions that we have made on earth. And we can glean some of those things from this parable. But Jesus' primary intention for telling this story, I think, is this: are we being faithful with our worldly resources. Right? I mean, Jesus says it right at the top. Here's the lesson. Here's what I'm trying to get across to you. You should use the things you have now to store up treasure in heaven. You can't serve money on earth and expect to be with God in eternity. I did tell you there'd be some squeaky bottom moments. What would it mean for us to be faithful with our worldly wealth? What would that mean? If we think about faith, right? Faith is a persuasive belief and trust in God. It's a deep-rooted commitment to say, I actually actively put my trust into the work of Jesus and to who God is. That is where my trust and belief is. That's faith. Faith is saying I'm leaning on God, not on me. And I think Jesus is trying to show us, like, if you've truly got your faith in eternity, where does that show up in your bank statement on earth? Where does that show up in your diary schedule? And I don't just mean, oh, well, I turn up to church once a week, but actually, how is our time resource ordered with the understanding that we should be pursuing things of eternal value and not just things that get us ahead in this world? When was the last time we, without being asked, gave somebody something that we owned because we could see they needed it more than us? Who are we inviting around our table? You know, we land in Luke 16 with a rich man who refuses to invite a poor man to his table. Well, in Luke 14, that's exactly what Jesus challenged the religious leaders on. Stop inviting your mates for dinner. Invite those who've got nothing. And then in Luke 16, we see that outcome of the rich man not doing that. So I think we have to ask ourselves, who is at our gate? You know, our resources, whatever they may be, our time, our money, our effort, our strength, our skill, our possessions, we like to think of them like they're a pie. And there's only so much of a pie, isn't there? And if I slice some of my pie and give it to you, then I've got less pie than when I started with. But actually, in God's view, our resources, our finances, our possessions, our skills, our time, our energy, anything that we have, it's not supposed to be a fixed pie. It's supposed to be a stream. It's supposed to flow out. Our resources are not meant to stay in our cupboard. They're meant to flow out to those who are at our gate. The rich man had an opportunity every day to open his gate and let the overflow of his abundance reach somebody who had nothing. And yet he chose not to. I think James, writing his letter in the New Testament, picks up on this theme. You can almost hear him thinking of the rich man and Lazarus. In James 5, 1-4, he says, "Look here, you rich people. Weep and groan with anguish because of all the terrible troubles ahead of you. Your wealth is rotting away, and your fine clothes are moth-eaten rags." Well, that's going to be awkward when the ambulance comes, isn't it? "Your gold and silver are corroded. The very wealth you are counting on will eat away your flesh like fire. This corroded treasure you have hoarded will testify against you on the day of judgment." Now, I think these scriptures, it doesn't mean that we can't be rich. It doesn't mean that we can't have things. It doesn't mean that having an overflow is a bad thing. But what is bad is when we shut the gate on it and we say, I'm hoarding all of this for me. Because here's the challenge. Most of us don't think we're hoarders. Because most of us think when James says, look here, you rich people, or the rich man in the story of the rich man and Lazarus, we think, well, that's not us. But in the global picture of humanity, it probably is. If you're watching me on a digital device, you might not call yourself rich, but you've got more than most people have in our world. And you might not be able to give thousands of pounds away to world events, but I guarantee you God's put somebody at your gate and he wants you to let something flow from you to them. He wants us not to hoard what we have, but to allow it to flow. What we do with our earthly resources has eternal consequences. And that's a real challenge. Because just like none of us want to be seen by the doctor with dirty pants on, we don't want to stand before God and have to give an account as to why we hoarded everything that he gave us. So I think, to be clear, neither Luke nor Jesus or me are saying that, to get to heaven you have to be poor, and if you're rich, you're automatically going to hell. The way to salvation is through Jesus alone and trusting in him. But I think what Luke and Jesus and James and what I would like to say is that if we've trusted in Jesus, one of the clearest ways to prove that, one of the clearest ways that gets worked out is that we no longer hoard what we have, but we let it flow out of our gate to those around us who need it. You cannot trust in God and misuse your worldly resources. It's one of the constant things that the religious of Jesus' day get slammed for. When they come out to see John the Baptist in Matthew 3, John the Baptist, it says this, when he saw many Pharisees and Sadducees coming to watch him baptized, he denounced them. You brood of snakes, he exclaimed. Who warned you to flee the coming wrath? Prove by the way you live that you have repented of your sins and turned to God. So I think, as I kind of bring this to a close, I think what the rich man and Lazarus shows us is that the way we live our lives now and the way we handle the earthly resources that we have prove whether we've truly repented and trusted in God, or they prove whether we're just giving it the lip service. So I guess there's two challenges for us to think about. If we don't know Jesus, if we're not a follower of him, if we've not put our belief and our trust in him, then we really need to think about what happens when we die. Is there a heaven and is there a hell? If God is real but I choose not to live with him on this earth, then would he solidify that decision when it gets to eternity? A bit like the rich man, would he turn to us and go, well, you chose this and now it's fixed? There's something to think about. If we are a follower of Jesus, if we have put our trust in him, if we are looking forward to that heavenly banquet and being with him, then we have to ask ourselves, how does that trust flow out in the way that we are living our lives? Because Luke 14, Luke 15, Luke 16, Jesus makes it explicitly clear. You cannot get caught up in the way of this world, the way of getting ahead, the way of getting to the top, the way of hoarding everything for you so that your life is comfortable. No, what you're supposed to do is give your life away. If you try and save your life, you will lose it. But if you lose it in service of God, by giving to those who don't, by serving those that nobody else will serve, by having compassion on those that others have rejected, by rejoicing with those that others don't want anywhere near, then you have truly understood what it means to be found by the King, and you're preparing yourself for eternity. Hope you've still got clean pants on. See you again soon.
Hello, my name's Naomi. It's been great to have you with us for our message here at Renewal. If you want to find out more about what it means to follow Jesus, you can visit renewalcc.com/next steps, and you'll be sent a few videos which might answer some of those bigger questions that you might have. Likewise, maybe you just want to say hello to the team, so you can email hello@renewalcc.com. And then if you're really enjoying all of these videos, what you can do is click the subscribe button, which is the wonderful red button that you cannot miss on your screen, to be notified of any other videos that come in. You can also listen to our messages on the go. So if you visit renewalcc.com/media, you'll be able to see podcasts, and then that will also link you to the YouTube channel. But maybe actually you just want to support the work that Renewal is doing. And you can do that by visiting renewalcc.com/give, and you can choose where your finance goes. All that's left to say is take care, God bless, and have a great week. Hopefully we'll see you soon.